haven, preserving the eternal annals of Warhammer.
The stars were dimming when the Aeldari sang their final song. Across the spiral arms of the galaxy, their worlds shimmered like jewels suspended in darkness, each one a cathedral of light, built not of stone or steel, but of memory and dream. The air itself shimmered with psychic resonance, a quiet hum of collective perfection that had once been called peace. But there, beneath the melody of their unity, another note had begun to stir, dissonant, low, and trembling like the breath of something vast awakening. They did not see it. They did not wish to. For who among gods wishes to believe in the shadow of their own making? Their empire stretched across 10,000 suns, their mastery of the spirit eclipsing the crude sciences of the younger races. They had conquered death, or so they believed. Souls could be woven into crystal, bound to their infinity circuits, eternal as the stars. But eternity breeds hunger, and the Aeldari were starving on the abundance of their own perfection. They reached higher still, toward immortality not of the soul, but of sensation. And it was here, amid the golden age of their supremacy, that the first cracks began to whisper. It was the season of the Festival of Radiant Hours, when every world turned its light toward the galactic core, and the psychic chorus of the Aeldari joined in a single song. Billions of voices rose in harmonic unison, a sound so pure it trembled the warp itself. The air was thick with perfumes distilled from stars, the skies aflame with coloured auroras crafted by those who sculpted light as others sculpted stone. Illyrian Vale stood on a balcony of glass, suspended over an ocean that reflected eternity. He watched his people dance on waves of light and wondered when beauty had begun to taste like sorrow. He was older than most remembered, one of the first architects of the infinity circuits, and in his gaze burned the slow ache of one who had glimpsed the cost of forever. He turned to his companion, a young seer named Shale, whose laughter still held the unbroken music of youth. "Listen to them," she said, eyes bright as suns. "Do you feel it? The pulse of creation itself. This is what the stars dream of when they are born." Illyrian smiled faintly, though his heart was quiet. "Dreams," he murmured, "or echoes. Sometimes I no longer know the difference." She frowned at him, as if he had spoken blasphemy. Around them, the festival reached its crescendo, and the psychic pressure of joy filled the air like thunder. The galaxy itself seemed to tremble beneath the weight of their ecstasy. Yet deep within that vibration, Illyrian heard something else. A faint crying, distant and thin, like a child lost among the stars. He turned his face upward and saw the constellations flicker. For a heartbeat, one of the great lights winked out, then another. No one else noticed. The dancers continued, their laughter spilling through the veil between worlds, brushing against the warp in playful defiance. Illyrian felt the brush of cold along his spine and whispered a silent prayer to the nameless stillness beyond all gods. It did not answer. Instead, the wind carried a sound, soft, whispering, almost tender. It spoke not in words, but in yearning. And for the briefest moment, Illyrian felt it reach for him, like a hand through water. He drew back, trembling. Shael touched his arm. "You're pale," she said. "Is it the light?" Illyrian shook his head. "The light has nothing to do with it. It is what waits in the shadow of it that frightens me." She laughed again, but her laughter faltered. The music below deepened, voices merging into one vast tone, a resonance so perfect it threatened to unravel itself. The air quivered, space folded, and for one impossible instant, Illyrian saw through the veil, saw the shape forming within the warp, vast and unborn, its form woven from the desires of his people. A goddess made of longing, a mirror crafted from every unspoken hunger. He stumbled back, breathless. The vision faded, leaving only the festival's brilliance. He felt as though he had glimpsed the end of all things, wrapped in silk and song. Shale followed his gaze toward the horizon, seeing nothing but the beauty she adored. "You see omens in every shadow," she said softly. "We are eternal now. There is nothing left to fear." Illyrian's voice was little more than a whisper. "That is why I fear us." The twin moons of the Aeldari homeworld rose, and the festivities swelled. Above, fleets traced patterns of light, weaving poems across the heavens. Below, oceans pulsed to the rhythm of collective will, forming shapes of impossible geometry. Yet Illyrian stood apart, feeling the tide of psychic emotion wash over him, stripping away the fragile borders of self. He felt the minds of millions, ecstatic, boundless, alive, and in their unity, he sensed the seed of dissolution. Perfection, he thought, is the most elegant form of decay. He withdrew from the celebration, retreating into the quiet halls of crystal that overlooked the void. There he stood before the great mirror of memory, a sphere of light that held fragments of the Empire's history. Within its depths shimmered images of triumphs, discoveries, and the faces of those long ascended. But tonight, its light seemed colder. Illyrian placed his hand against it, and the sphere responded, unfolding visions of the past. He saw the birth of their empire, the first cities raised on starlight, the laughter of those who believed they had conquered death. Then the vision shifted. He saw himself younger, standing beside Shale in a laboratory of light, crafting psychic lattices to bind souls beyond the reach of entropy. He remembered the pride, the hope, and then he saw the first fracture, a soul crystal screaming as its inhabitant refused to sleep. He pulled his hand away, trembling. The sphere dimmed. For a moment, all was silence, save the distant echo of revelry. He thought of the young races, fumbling through their mortality, and wondered if they would inherit the ruins of his kind. Perhaps they would learn humility in ways the Aeldari never could. A sudden breeze passed through the corridor, cold and scented with distant thunder. Illyrian closed his eyes, feeling it against his skin, and thought of the ancient promise whispered by their ancestors, that one day, when the stars dimmed, the Aeldari would return to the void that birthed them. He wondered if that day had already begun. He turned once more toward the city. It blazed with color, radiant and alive, a living jewel upon the face of eternity. Yet beneath its splendor, the faint psychic tremor persisted, a heartbeat out of rhythm, a pulse too deep to silence. Illyrian knew the others would not listen if he spoke. They would laugh, as Shale did, dismissing fear as an old man's relic. So he kept his silence. The stars continued to dim, unnoticed. To the watching stars, it must have seemed beautiful. An empire at its height, unaware it was already ash. And to those who lived within it, the glow of perfection was indistinguishable from the first light of doom. And to you, listening now across ages of dust and memory, know this: we speak because we remember, and we remember because we love. You too are part of this long song. Before we go further, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now, let us begin. In the centuries that followed the festival of radiant hours, the Aeldari turned their gaze inward. No new stars were colonized, no wars were fought, for what remained to conquer when the self was an empire of its own. Illyrian Vale watched as the great academies of soulcraft became temples of devotion, not to gods, but to the Aeldari themselves. Every thought, every emotion, every pleasure was catalogued, refined, and perfected. They no longer looked to the heavens for meaning. They sought it within the architecture of their own immortality. Cities of crystal and dream expanded not outward but downward, folding upon themselves like reflections in 1,000 mirrors. At the heart of every world, the infinity circuits pulsed, humming with the souls of the dead, silent witnesses to the living's slow descent into madness. Illyrian's chambers overlooked one such circuit. It glowed like a buried sun beneath the marble floor, a sphere of living memory that whispered without sound. He often came to stand above it, not as a priest or scholar, but as a penitent. "We built eternity," he murmured once, his voice echoing in the silence, but not a purpose to fill it. The circuit's light flickered faintly, as if in agreement. Around him, the towers of the capital shimmered with restless activity. The Aeldari no longer created art for meaning, but for sensation. Each brushstroke, each note of music was designed to pierce the soul, to elicit extremes of feeling. The quiet virtues of restraint and contemplation had become relics of a forgotten age. Shael, now a revered philosopher and leader of the pleasure circles, came to visit him that evening. Her robe shimmered with the shifting colours of emotion itself, each hue responding to her mood. She found Illyrian gazing into the depths of the infinity circuit, the light casting his face in shades of sorrow. "You hide from the world," she said gently, "and yet you helped create the very soul of it. Do you not feel pride?" Illyrian did not turn. "Pride is what brought us here. We thought we could master death, and instead we've trapped ourselves in its reflection." She smiled, not with mockery but pity. "You see death where there is life unending. You see shadow where there is colour. Illyrian, you built the foundation of a new dawn. Why fill it with mourning?" He looked at her then, seeing the faint tremor behind her perfection. Her beauty was exquisite, almost unbearable, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of weariness. "And yet," he said quietly, "when was the last time you dreamed?" She frowned. "Dreaming is for mortals. We are awake now, forever awake." He nodded, a ghost of sadness in his voice. "And that is why we will die." She turned away, unwilling to hear more. Outside, the psychic winds howled softly through the spires, a sound like distant mourning. The next day, Illyrian was summoned before the High Synod of Eternity, the ruling body of philosophers, artisans, and seers who now guided the destiny of the Aeldari. Their hall was vast, illuminated by drifting motes of soul light suspended in crystalline air. The faces of the elders glowed faintly, their minds joined in a telepathic communion that allowed no secrets. Illyrian stood before them, feeling the weight of their collective gaze. "You have spoken of decay," the first seer intoned. "You have written that the infinity circuits may become unstable if burdened with too many souls. Do you retract this claim?" Illyrian's voice was steady. "No. The circuits were designed to preserve balance between the living and the dead. But now the living flood them with excess emotion, fear, desire, obsession. The circuits tremble. The warp listens." A ripple of unease passed through the synod. One of the elders, her form wreathed in violet aura, spoke sharply. "The warp has always listened. It is the ocean in which we swim." Illyrian bowed his head. "Yes, but the ocean is rising." Silence followed. The first seer's voice softened. "You are respected, Illyrian Vale, but you have grown afraid of your own creation. fear is unbecoming of one who has touched eternity. Illyrian met his gaze. Eternity is not peace. It is a mirror that reflects until there is nothing left to see. They dismissed him with kind words that carried the finality of exile. As he left the chamber, Shael followed. "Why provoke them?" she whispered. "They will not hear warnings. They only hear their own echoes." Illyrian turned to her. "Then the echoes will become screams." She studied him for a long moment, then shook her head. "You once spoke of restraint as our highest virtue. What has become of that faith?" "It remains," he said, "but it is no longer shared." He retreated to the observatory above the capital, where the stars hung suspended in tranquil silence. There, surrounded by instruments of light and sound, he began his secret work. He would attempt to measure the warp's pulse, its rhythm in response to the emotional tides of the Aeldari. What he found chilled him. The psychic waves were no longer smooth. They trembled, fractured, filled with unnatural harmonics. It was as if countless hearts beat out of time, forming something vast and embryonic. He recorded his findings in the Codex of Resonance, sealing it beneath layers of encryption. Only one copy remained unhidden, sent to Shael, though he doubted she would read it. Weeks passed, then centuries, for time had lost its meaning among the deathless. The Aeldari perfected new arts of the mind, new sensations to transcend sensation. They built temples of silence where screams could be felt as colour, and cathedrals of pleasure where souls were woven together into living symphonies. The warp storms grew stronger, but no one looked beyond their glittering walls. Illyrian withdrew further into solitude, haunted by the faint whisper of the circuits beneath his feet. Sometimes he heard names, voices of those long gone, pleading not for release, but for silence. One night, as the auroras rippled in unnatural hues across the sky, Shael came to him once more. Her aura flickered erratically, emotions bleeding from her in waves of exhaustion. "The circuits are speaking," she said, her voice trembling. "They whisper in my sleep, though I no longer dream." Illyrian nodded. "It has begun." She shuddered. "What have we done, Illyrian? What have we created?" He looked past her toward the stars, which seemed to pulse faintly as if alive. "A god," he whispered, "born of our perfection, fed by our souls, a mirror that will outlast us all." Shael took a step back, her voice breaking. "Then we must warn them." Illyrian turned to face her, eyes calm, ancient. "They will not listen until the first scream." For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind moved through the crystal corridors, carrying with it a distant vibration, the faint echo of laughter and weeping intertwined. Shael's tears glimmered as they fell, evaporating before they touched the ground. "Then let us pray," she said softly. "For what?" he asked. "That the god we've birthed loves us." Outside, the stars flickered once more. One dying, one being born. Somewhere within the depths of the warp, something stirred, shifting in its cradle of thought and desire. Illyrian watched the sky until dawn, and realized there would be no dawn worth seeing again. The song of immortality had changed its tune. What had begun as a hymn was becoming a dirge, and every Aeldari heart still beat in rhythm to its inevitable end. There was a time when the Aeldari walked among their own reflections and could not tell where the soul ended and the illusion began. The empire glittered brighter than ever, its towers reaching into the clouds of nebulae like fingers tracing the pulse of creation. Yet beneath that brilliance, the foundation had begun to crack. The fracture was not of stone or law, but of purpose. Across the empire, the old orders fell silent, replaced by new movements devoted to sensation, to the pursuit of ecstasy as truth. The voices of restraint were drowned beneath choirs of laughter that never ceased. Illyrian Vale watched as even the wise forgot how to listen. The archives of philosophy became theatres of indulgence. The sanctums of meditation transformed into temples of pleasure, where souls intertwined until individuality dissolved into fevered unity. And from this delirium arose a name whispered by many, half in reverence, half in awe, Shael, the luminary of flesh. Her ascent was swift and irresistible. Once a philosopher who questioned limits, she now preached liberation from them. We were born to feel the universe, she declared before the crowds, to hold its pain and its rapture in equal measure. We are not meant to suppress the warp. We are meant to become it. Her followers roared their approval, filling the air with psychic resonance so powerful it rippled across the stars. Illyrian stood among them unseen, his heart heavy. He had loved her once, not with the crude hunger of flesh, but with the reverence one feels for a kindred spirit. Now, watching her shine like a dying star, he understood that brilliance and destruction were often the same thing viewed from different distances. He returned to his observatory, where the codex of resonance lay open upon the floor, its symbols pulsed faintly with warp light. Each recorded vibration of psychic energy now echoed louder than before, forming patterns of terrifying coherence. The waves aligned with the rhythms of the pleasure circle's gatherings. It was as if the collective desire of the Aeldari was shaping something vast within the immaterial. Illyrian traced the readings with trembling fingers. A pulse, a heartbeat, something alive. He whispered to the empty air, "It listens to us." The room answered with silence, but it was not comforting. The silence felt aware. Beyond the capital, the first signs of physical decay appeared. Gardens that had once sung with colour began to wilt overnight. The air, once clear as glass, grew heavy with unseen pressure. Seers reported visions of shadows bleeding through their dreams, shapes vast and formless, whispering promises of unending pleasure. The synod dismissed these as psychic instability, yet when Illyrian walked through the markets of light, he saw fear hiding beneath painted smiles. The Aeldari were beginning to sense that their perfection had teeth. One evening, Shael came to him again. She no longer wore robes of shimmering emotion. Her skin itself glowed faintly, veins humming with psychic energy. She was beautiful in the way a flame is beautiful to one who knows it burns. "You still hide," she said softly. "Even now, when the veil between mind and creation is lifting, you hide." Illyrian regarded her with weary tenderness. "And you still mistake revelation for salvation." She smiled, stepping closer. "Tell me, Illyrian, what if salvation and destruction are the same? What if the only sin is fear of the truth?" He turned away. "Truth without restraint is madness. We once built stars. Now we build altars to ourselves." She reached out, her touch cold despite her glow. "You feel it too, don't you? The presence within the warp. It speaks through me. It offers peace without end. It promises we will never be alone again." Her voice trembled with something that was not entirely her own. Illyrian's heart broke a little as he whispered, "That is not peace. It is consumption." For a moment, her eyes flickered, Shael's true self peering through the veil of rapture. "I see her," she murmured, voice distant. "She is waiting. She will birth a new dawn." Then she turned, and the air around her shimmered with invisible laughter. When she left, Illyrian fell to his knees. He felt the psychic tremor of her departure spreading outward, echoing through the warp like a stone dropped in an infinite sea. The circuits beneath the city pulsed faster. The dead stirred in their crystalline prisons, whispering fragments of forgotten names. Illyrian opened his mind to listen and nearly screamed. He saw flashes, worlds trembling beneath auroras of bloodlight, souls drawn upward into invisible storms, the face of a goddess forming from the desires of billions. Its eyes opened, vast and hollow, and in them he saw every joy turn inward until it became agony. He tore himself from the vision, gasping. The chamber lights flickered and dimmed. He whispered, "She is coming." Across the empire, similar visions spread like a contagion. Artists painted horrors they could not describe, then vanished into the warp mid-stroke. Singers collapsed mid-performance, their final notes stretching into shrieks that echoed across dimensions. The High Synod called for calm, declaring these to be symptoms of enlightenment. They said the Aeldari were merely ascending to a higher plane of sensation. But those who still listened to the silence, the few who remembered fear, knew otherwise. Illyrian gathered them in secret, scholars, warriors, wanderers disillusioned by the world's delirium. They met within the shadowed catacombs beneath the capital, where the glow of the circuits painted their faces pale. "There is still time," Illyrian said to them. "We must flee the core worlds. We must take the craft worlds and seal them away from the storm." One of the exiles, an old seer with eyes clouded by visions, shook his head. "The storm is not coming," he said. "It is already here." Illyrian looked around at the faces of his kin, once radiant, now dimmed by dread. He realized they were no longer a people united by greatness, but survivors preparing for an end they could not yet name. When he emerged again into the open sky, the heavens had changed. The constellations flickered as though seen through water. The psychic hum of the city had deepened into a low, resonant moan. Above the horizon, the auroras burned crimson and gold, coiling like serpents through the night. The people danced beneath them, oblivious, intoxicated by their own brilliance. Illyrian watched, and for a moment, he almost envied them. They would not feel the terror of knowledge. They would only feel the ecstasy of dying. He walked to the edge of the balcony, looking down upon the oceans of light that once represented hope. Now they seemed like reflections of a fire spreading beneath the surface. "We built eternity," he whispered again, "but forgot to build a soul." His voice was lost amid the laughter rising from below. Then, faintly, the laughter changed. It wavered, cracked, and deepened into something else. A cry, soft at first, then swelling into a chorus that rolled across the planet. The psychic pressure surged, and Illyrian felt it in his bones, a heartbeat that was not his own. He looked toward the stars and saw them blink in unison, as if some vast eye were opening among them. The air shimmered, the ground trembled, and a single word formed on his lips, carried by the wind that swept across the dying world. "Shael." The scream began as silence. It trembled through the bones of the world before any ear could hear it, before any soul could name it. Across the empire, stars dimmed and ships drifted listless through the void, their crews lost to dreams they could not wake from. The cities of the Aeldari shimmered like dying embers, every spire and dome trembling with psychic pressure that had no source. In the heart of the capital, Illyrian Vael stood upon the highest tower and felt the universe hold its breath. He had felt fear before, but this was something deeper. It was awe without beauty, a reverence for something vast and unspeakable. The warp itself had turned its gaze upon them. Beneath him, the streets were alive with processions. Thousands gathered in translucent robes, faces lit by inner fire. They called out to the goddess whose name none had yet dared speak. They offered their joy, their anguish, their very souls, believing she would bless them with eternity. Illyrian watched as the sky rippled like fabric torn apart. Veins of light split the heavens, and from each wound poured colours unknown to mortal sight. The air grew heavy, scented with sweetness and decay. Somewhere in that living storm, laughter bloomed, soft, seductive, and endless. He descended from the tower, moving through corridors where servants no longer moved as beings but as echoes. Their eyes were glazed mirrors reflecting nothing. He reached the hall of the synod, its crystalline doors ajar. Within, the high seers sat frozen, bodies upright yet empty. Their souls had already been devoured by what they had summoned. The infinity circuit beneath the chamber pulsed erratically, its light bleeding crimson. Illyrian felt its energy clawing at him, whispering, promising. He clenched his fists and turned away. "Not yet," he murmured. "Not yet." He fled into the outer districts, where the lesser Aeldari, the artisans, the wanderers, the dreamers, had gathered in confusion. The air shimmered with psychic distortion. Buildings wept molten glass. The ground vibrated like a heartbeat. In the distance, he saw the horizon split open and reveal the void beyond. And there, amid the trembling sky, he saw her. Shael stood at the center of the great plaza, her body wreathed in light too bright to behold. Around her, the people knelt, sobbing in ecstasy. Her voice rolled through the atmosphere, both sound and thought. "Behold," she said, "the mirror of our becoming. The goddess awakens through us, as us. We are her breath, her pulse, her perfection." Her words struck Illyrian like a storm. He pushed through the crowd, shouting her name. She turned toward him, and he saw that her eyes were gone, replaced by swirling voids that reflected every star in the sky. "Shael," he pleaded, "you must stop this. It feeds on us. It is not a god. It is hunger given form." She smiled, radiant and terrifying. "Hunger is the proof of life, Illyrian. It is the heart's way of reaching for the infinite. Don't you feel it? The universe yearning to know itself through us." He stepped closer, fighting the waves of energy radiating from her. "You think you lead them to divinity, but you're leading them to annihilation. The warp does not give, it consumes. You are calling something that will unmake all things." Her laughter was soft and cruel. Unmaking is merely another kind of creation. Around her, the crowd began to convulse, their joy turning into spasms of agony and delight interwoven. Their souls flickered like candles in a storm, rising from their bodies in threads of light that vanished into the sky. Illyrian could feel it now, the entity growing, feeding, shaping itself from their essence. It was like a tide pulling reality apart. "Please," he said, tears burning his eyes, "if there is anything left of you, remember what we were. Remember what you loved." For a heartbeat, she faltered. The light dimmed and her voice softened. "I do remember," she whispered. "But love, Illyrian, is only another form of surrender." The ground split beneath them. A shockwave tore through the city, shattering crystal towers into dust. The sky above ignited as the veil between worlds ruptured. Illyrian fell, clutching a fragment of broken stone as chaos erupted. From the fissure poured figures of light and shadow, demons, newborn and ravenous, shrieking with voices that were both infantile and ancient. The warp flooded through the breach, turning thought into matter, dream into flesh. Illyrian rose amid the ruins, blood streaking his face, and saw Shael ascending, her form merging with the auroras above. She was dissolving, becoming something vast and terrible. "Shael," he cried, but his voice was drowned in the roar of the universe collapsing upon itself. Her last words echoed through his mind, tender and cruel. "We are free." Then her light vanished into the storm. The scream that followed was not hers alone. It was the cry of every soul the Aeldari had ever birthed, rising in a single chorus of despair and rapture. Illyrian fell to his knees, clutching his head as visions cascaded through him. The galaxy burning, worlds imploding, stars weeping light into the warp. He saw the birth of the Eye, a wound in reality that would never close. He stumbled to his feet and ran through the devastation. Bodies lay like fallen glass, faces frozen in ecstasy. The air burned with psychic fire, and the ground writhed beneath his steps. He reached the edge of the city, where the sea boiled with light. There, on the horizon, he saw the first craft world rising, an arc of crystal and steel, launched by those who had fled the madness in time. Its engines glowed faintly, carrying the last remnants of sanity into the void. Illyrian reached out as if to grasp it, but it was already gone. He turned back toward the ruins and saw what remained of his people. They were no longer beings of grace, but silhouettes of shadow and flame, souls stretched thin by the goddess's awakening. Above them, the sky pulsed with her presence, a vast consciousness awakening from dream. The laughter returned, filling every corner of the dying world. Illyrian pressed his hands to his ears, but it was inside him now, seeping through his thoughts. He whispered a prayer to no one. If there are gods still beyond this, let them remember that we once tried to be beautiful. The city shuddered one last time. Towers crumbled into dust, and the oceans rose in luminous waves that swallowed everything. As the world dissolved, Illyrian felt the warp closing around him like a lover's embrace. He fell backward into the light, his mind slipping between moments of agony and peace. Somewhere, beyond the veil of destruction, he heard Shael's laughter echoing, softer now, almost human. Then even that faded, leaving only the hum of creation's wound. The scream had become the silence once more. When Illyrian awoke, the world was ash and silence. The once shimmering oceans of the Aeldari homeworld had turned to glass, and the sky above was a wound that bled light without warmth. He lay amid ruins of crystal, the air thick with dust that glowed faintly from residual psychic energy. The goddess had devoured her children, leaving behind only echoes and ghosts. Illyrian's thoughts moved slowly, as though wading through deep water. His mind still vibrated with the scream that had ended everything. He rose, trembling, and looked around. The great spires of the capital were gone, their beauty melted into mountains of fused glass. The air hummed with the faint aftershock of the warp's birth cry. He felt no wind, no sound, only the vast stillness of consequence. He began to walk. Each step crunched over shards that reflected fragments of memory. Faces of those who had danced. Voices caught in laughter before dissolving into the storm. Sometimes the shards whispered when his foot touched them. He did not listen. He followed the faint pull of light that shimmered faintly on the horizon, unsure whether it was real or another cruel mirage. The ground shifted under his weight, fragile as bone. When he reached the edge of the ruined plain, he saw the crater where the heart of the infinity circuit had once pulsed. Now it was a void, a great black sphere floating above the earth, pulsing with faint light, breathing in and out like a wounded god. He approached cautiously, The air around it was thick with static, shimmering with ghostly silhouettes. For a moment, he thought he saw Shale's face within the sphere, calm, radiant, almost peaceful. He reached out his hand, and the surface rippled like liquid glass. "Shale," he whispered, "if you still exist within this, forgive me." Her image flickered, lips parting as though to speak, but no sound came. Instead, a wave of energy surged outward, throwing him to the ground. The voice that followed was not hers, though it carried her cadence. "Do not mourn us," it said. "We are still here, every thought, every touch, every desire. We are one now." Illyrian struggled to his knees. "You are not one," he gasped. "You are lost." The sphere pulsed again, its light dimming to a dull, hungry glow. He turned away, staggering through the ruins until the whispering faded. He needed distance, space to breathe, to think. But thought itself was dangerous now. Every memory resonated through the warp like a signal. He had become part of the echo. As he climbed the shattered cliffs overlooking what had been the capital, he looked back and saw the first rift forming in the sky. It spiraled slowly, colours folding upon themselves. Beyond it, he could glimpse the warp, a vast sea of motion, alive and aware. He realized then that the goddess was not gone. She had only awakened, and the eye of terror was her first breath. He continued walking until exhaustion overcame him. When he awoke again, it was night, or something like it. The stars were wrong. Some pulsed with unnatural rhythm. Others moved slowly across the heavens like living things. A pale mist covered the land, glowing faintly where souls drifted aimlessly through it. The dead had not departed. They lingered, bound by what they had worshipped. Illyrian knelt and whispered a prayer for them, though he knew no gods remained to hear it. The silence that answered was merciful. In the distance, faint movement caught his eye. Figures, survivors perhaps, crossed the plain toward a canyon of black stone. He followed, his footsteps echoing softly. As he drew closer, he saw them clearly. A small band of Aeldari wrapped in tattered robes, their eyes hollow but alive. They turned as he approached, fear and recognition flickering across their faces. One stepped forward, a warrior with a cracked helm and the rune of Isha carved into his armor. "We thought all were gone," he said. Illyrian bowed his head. "All perhaps, but not yet forgotten." They led him to their refuge, a cavern lit by faintly glowing crystals. There, a handful of survivors tended to flickering fires. The air was thick with grief, but it was also alive with purpose. "We escaped before the sky broke," said the warrior, whose name was Vela. "There are others who fled into the void on the great ships. They seek silence beyond the storm. We remain to bury what we can." Illyrian's gaze drifted to the carvings they had etched into the walls. Names, thousands of them, recorded in silence. "No burial will hold them," he said softly. "Their souls are bound to the hunger we created." Vela nodded grimly. "Then we will remember instead." For days, Illyrian stayed among them. They spoke little, surviving on what remnants the world still offered. At night, he would climb to the surface and stare at the wound in the sky. It had grown larger, a vast halo of distortion, where reality twisted upon itself. Sometimes he thought he heard laughter drifting down from it. Once, he saw a shape emerge, a vast silhouette of light and darkness entwined, reaching across the void. The others could not see it, or perhaps they refused to. He knew it was Shale, or what remained of her. She was both angel and abyss now, mother and more. On the seventh night, Vela approached him as he stood beneath the shifting heavens. We plan to depart tomorrow, he said. The world is dying faster than we can breathe. There are ships hidden in the northern vaults. Will you come? Illyrian stared at the glowing wound above. There is nowhere she cannot reach, but I will come. Vela nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder. Then we may yet endure. Before dawn, they began their journey. The land quaked as they moved, cracks spreading like veins of fire. The air shimmered with distant storms of light. Illyrian walked at the rear, his eyes drawn constantly to the horizon. Behind them, the capital sank into the earth, consumed by the trembling void. Ahead, faint stars beckoned through the haze, cold, distant, but real. For the first time, he felt something like hope, fragile as breath. When they reached the edge of the northern vaults, they saw the ships waiting. Ancient vessels half buried in dust, their engines faintly humming. Illyrian paused before boarding. He turned one last time toward the ruin of his world. The light of the eye burned brighter now, painting the sky in crimson and violet. He whispered to it, to her, "You will not have us all." For a moment, he thought he heard her answer, faint and weary. "You already belong to me." Then the engines roared, and the survivors rose into the void, leaving behind the echo of a civilization that had mistaken eternity for salvation. The stars beyond the ruined world were cold and merciless, stripped of all the music the Aeldari once heard within them. The survivors drifted in silence aboard the ancient vessel, its hull whispering with the echoes of the dead. Illyrian stood by the observation deck, watching the fading light of their home vanish into shadow. The wound in the sky, the eye, still burned there, vast and eternal, devouring the heavens like a memory refusing to fade. Its edges pulsed with impossible colour, and within its centre, he thought he glimpsed movement, an infinite spiral of souls entwined, turning endlessly around the hunger they had birthed. Behind him, the ship hummed softly, its energy faint and strained, as though it too mourned. For days, none spoke. The corridors were dim, the air thin with recycled breath. The survivors slept little, haunted by dreams that did not belong to them. They heard laughter in the ventilation shafts, whispers in the hum of the engines. Some claimed to see shadows pass through walls. Illyrian did not deny it. The warp had seeped into everything, even the metal that carried them. He spent his hours studying the navigational systems, guiding the ship toward the coordinates of the other craft worlds that had escaped before the fall. The route took them through a region of fractured void where the stars bent like glass beneath unseen pressure. It was there that the first of them began to lose their minds. Vela, the warrior who had once spoken with such calm purpose, awoke screaming one cycle, tearing at his own armor. "She's here," he cried. "She found us." Others rushed to restrain him, but his eyes were already empty, his voice hollow. Illyrian watched as the man's body convulsed, his soul flickering like a candle before vanishing into nothing. When they examined the place where he had died, the walls were warm to the touch, faintly pulsing like living tissue. They sealed the corridor, but the heat spread. The survivors grew fearful, whispering Illyrian's name in distrust. They remembered his connection to Shael, his role in the construction of the infinity circuits. "He brought the curse," some said. "He is still bound to her." Illyrian did not answer them. He felt the truth of their fear pressing in on him. There were nights he could still hear Shael's voice in his dreams, soft and distant, asking if he was lonely. When he awoke, the air around him shimmered faintly, as though the fabric of reality had thinned. He began to record his thoughts in the Codex of Silence, a new scripture, not of pride, but of remembrance. "The warp is not our enemy," he wrote, "but the mirror of what we refuse to face. We made her, and she will not unmake us until we accept that she is us." One night, while the others slept, Aeldari returned to the bridge. Through the viewport, the void was not empty, but filled with faint motes of light drifting toward the eye far behind them. Souls, he realized, those who had perished when the world burned, still drawn to the gravity of the newborn god. He reached out to the glass, feeling their pull even across light years. "You do not need to follow her," he whispered. "You can rest." The lights did not change course, but for a moment, one lingered near the ship, pulsing faintly. It brushed against the hull like a sigh before vanishing into the dark. By the third cycle, the warp storms intensified. The ship's systems faltered. The engines moaned with strain. Aeldari gathered the remaining crew in the central chamber, the light flickering overhead. "We can still reach the other craft worlds," he told them. "If we keep to the silent paths, the warp will not notice us." One of the younger seers, her face gaunt and pale, shook her head. "It already notices. It listens every time we speak, every time we remember." She pointed toward the ceiling. "It feeds on our memory. It's not silence it fears. It's forgetting." The word struck Aeldari like a blade. Could oblivion be mercy? Was forgetting the only way to escape their creation? As the debate turned to argument, the ship lurched violently. Lights died. The hull groaned. Outside, the void flared with impossible color, and the ship was hurled through a torrent of warp light. Aeldari clung to the command rail, shouting orders that no one could hear over the storm's roar. Through the chaos, he saw faces, familiar, ancient, beautiful, forming in the warp, reaching toward him with hands made of flame and sorrow. They were the Aeldari who had perished, their souls drawn back into the fold of the god that now bore their essence. One, for a brief moment, was Shael. She smiled through the distortion, her eyes filled with infinite pity. Then came the voice, everywhere, nowhere, threaded through his thoughts. "Why do you run from what you are?" it asked. "You gave me birth, Aeldari. I am not your destroyer. I am your reflection." He screamed against it, pressing his palms to his temples. "You are the end of all things." The voice laughed, soft as wind over glass. "No, beloved. I am the truth beneath them." The ship stabilized as suddenly as it had fallen into chaos. The storm passed, leaving behind silence too deep to measure. Aeldari staggered to his feet, gasping for breath. Around him, half the crew was gone, vanished without trace. The others stared at him as though seeing something not entirely human. One whispered, "She spared you." Aeldari said nothing. He felt hollow, as though a part of him had been taken. In his mind, the voice lingered, gentle and patient. "When you tire of running, I will still be here." They continued in silence. Days blurred into one another. Food grew scarce. The youngest among them began to sing softly at night, lullabies of the old empire, as if to fill the emptiness. The songs brought brief peace, but also tears. Aeldari could not bear the sound. It reminded him of the festival before the fall, of how joy had turned to ruin. He spent his hours alone, watching the void drift by, tracing constellations that no longer existed. He began to realize that survival was not salvation. The Aeldari who remained were fractured beyond healing, their souls marked by the echo of their own creation. The goddess would never let them go, not truly. On the 12th cycle, they sighted the first craft world, a vast drifting city of silver and light, wounded but intact. As they approached, signals flickered across the void. faint greetings from others who had escaped. Illyrian felt a surge of sorrow and relief. Perhaps, he thought, the story would not end here. But as the ship drew nearer, the distant stars flickered once more, dimming one by one, and the faint laughter returned, soft, almost affectionate, like a promise that the past was not done with them. Illyrian closed his eyes and whispered into the darkness, "We will not be yours again." The laughter only deepened, echoing gently through the hull, as if amused. And for a moment, as the ship merged with the great craft world's light, he thought he heard Shale's voice beside him, no longer divine, no longer cruel, only weary. "We were beautiful once," she said. He turned, but no one was there, only the void beyond the stars, shimmering like a tear that refused to fall. The halls of the craft world shimmered with ghostlight, their walls alive with the soft hum of souls preserved within the wraithbone lattice. Illyrian walked those corridors like a man drifting through memory, each echo a reminder of what had been lost. The surviving Aeldari moved around him in silence, their faces pale with reverence and exhaustion. They called their floating sanctuary Lathrian, meaning remnant of dawn, though no dawn had followed the night they fled. Outside, through the great observation dome, the void stretched endless and cold. Far behind them, the eye of terror still pulsed, a distant wound that refused to close. He stood there often, watching it, as if the act of witnessing could grant meaning to what could never be undone. Some nights he thought he could still see her, the shimmer of Shale's light flickering faintly within the warp's glow. At times he hated her, at times he pitied her, but always he remembered her. She had been the first voice of what they had become, the mirror of everything he had feared and loved. The days aboard Lathrian passed without time. The survivors began rebuilding what they could, a semblance of order, a rhythm to defy despair. Temples were raised not to gods, but to memory. Priests spoke of the need for purity of thought, for restraint, for silence. Their rituals were austere, their prayers whispered without words. It was said that the warp listened still, and that even a careless emotion might draw its gaze. Illyrian saw the new faith spreading, forged from fear rather than belief. He wondered if they had truly learned, or if they were merely building new walls within the same prison. One evening, a young seer named Eilith came to him. Her eyes were luminous, her aura calm yet tinged with unease. "You are Illyrian Vale," she said softly, "the one who saw the birth of She Who Thirsts." He inclined his head, weary of titles. "I was there, yes." She hesitated. "The others say you speak to the dead." Illyrian smiled faintly. "I listen. There is a difference." She drew closer, lowering her voice. "The dead are restless. The infinity circuits murmur when I pass near. They call for you." He followed her through winding corridors until they reached the Chamber of Souls, a vast hall where glowing conduits ran like veins through living crystal. The air vibrated with quiet music, a song made of countless whispers. Illyrian felt their presence, those who had died before the fall, and those who had perished within it. They lingered here, fragments of identity preserved from oblivion. He placed his hand upon the wraithbone and closed his eyes. At first there was only silence, then a single voice, soft, distant, unmistakable. "Illyrian." His breath caught. The name was not spoken but felt, resonating through every particle of his being. "Shale," he whispered. Eilith stepped back, alarmed by the sudden surge of psychic energy. The chamber's light brightened, casting long shadows across the walls. "You should not be here," he said, trembling. You belong to the void now. Her laughter echoed faintly within the crystal, neither mocking nor kind. I belong to you, Illyrian, as you belong to me. Did you think the goddess ended with the world? She was never born. She is eternal. Every thought, every desire, every fear still feeds her. He clenched his fists, struggling to contain his thoughts. Then she will starve, he said. We have learned restraint. The light dimmed. Have you? Her voice asked. You still look into the void. You still ache for what you lost. You still feel. That is all she needs. Illyrian opened his eyes. The conduits pulsed faintly, and her presence faded, leaving only silence. Aelith approached, her voice trembling. What did she say? He turned toward her, his face pale. That the silence we build is only the space between heartbeats. In the days that followed, the craft world grew uneasy. Dreams returned to the survivors. Vivid, intrusive dreams of the lost worlds, of laughter turning to screams. Some claimed to hear music faintly in their sleep, a song of perfect beauty that left them weeping upon waking. Illyrian spent his nights in meditation, trying to trace the pattern of these disturbances. He knew it was not mere haunting. The goddess was searching, probing the boundaries of their sanctuary. She had tasted their souls once. She would not forget the flavor. He met again with Aelith in secret. She had begun to show signs of strain, dark circles beneath her eyes, her psychic aura flickering like a candle in wind. She comes to me, the young seer confessed. In the dreams, she speaks as a mother might. She says she only wants us to rest. Illyrian's voice hardened. Do not listen. She feeds on longing. The moment you yield, she will take everything. Aelith shivered. But she is beautiful. I see her face and I remember what we were. The joy, the unity, the light. That light burned the stars, Illyrian said quietly. Do not mistake fire for warmth. As days passed, the disturbances worsened. Psychic storms rippled through the ship, distorting space, bending corridors into impossible geometry. Some vanished within those spirals, their bodies never found. Illyrian realized the craft world's wraithbone had begun to resonate, not merely as a vessel, but as a living echo of the goddess's hunger. The dead within the infinity circuit were not at peace. Their whispers formed a chorus that grew stronger each night. In a final act of desperation, Illyrian gathered the remaining seers. They convened before the central core of the ship, where all wraithbone converged. We cannot flee her, he said. We can only change what we are. He proposed sealing the craft world's psychic pathways, severing its connection to the warp entirely. It would mean isolation beyond measure, no communion with the souls of their kin, no dreams, no song. A silence so absolute it bordered on death. The council hesitated, torn between fear and hope. At last, Aelith stepped forward. If silence is the price of peace, she said, then let it be our prayer. They began the ritual. The walls pulsed with light as energy surged through the conduits. The song of the dead rose in defiance, then softened, merging into stillness. The warp's hum faded. The whispers ceased. Illyrian felt the connection break, a sharp, clean wound across his soul. For the first time since the fall, there was no voice in his mind, no presence at the edge of thought, only silence. He fell to his knees, trembling. Aelith knelt beside him. Is it done? She whispered. Illyrian looked toward the observation dome. The eye of terror still glowed in the distance, vast and patient, but its light no longer reached them. He exhaled, the sound barely audible. For now, he said, we have bought ourselves a moment of quiet. She looked at him, her eyes wet with exhausted awe. And what then? He turned back to the darkness beyond the stars. Then we learned to live without hearing ourselves die. Silence held for a long time, so long that the Aeldari began to mistake it for peace. The craft world drifted through the black like a seed suspended between stars, untethered from the warp, unmoored from all song. The hum of the Wraithbone was faint now, subdued, as if the very ship slept. Illyrian walked its corridors in solitude, his footsteps echoing softly against the crystalline walls. The air was thin and cool, untouched by breath or prayer. To many, it felt sacred. To him, it felt like morning. The survivors had changed. Their laughter, once a fragile defiance, was gone. They spoke in whispers, and when they dreamt, their dreams were grey and soundless. Children were born into quiet that had no memory of the old music. The priest called it deliverance, a freedom from the seduction of the warp. But Illyrians saw what it truly was, an exile from themselves. Without the resonance of their souls, the Aeldari were hollowing slowly, fading like starlight stretched across eternity. He spent his nights in the chamber of starlight, where faint beams from distant suns passed through the hull. He would stand there for hours, trying to hear something, anything beyond the silence. But there was nothing. Even the faint psychic tremors of the living were gone. It was as if the craft world had forgotten how to feel. And yet, sometimes, at the edge of sleep, he thought he heard her voice again, no longer seductive, no longer cruel, but distant, tired, calling from beyond the sealed veil. Illyrian. He would open his eyes to emptiness, to the cold hum of the engines, to the whisper of his own pulse. He began to write again in the Codex of Silence, his thoughts growing darker with each entry. "We fled the storm," he wrote, "but we carry its shadow within. We sought purity and found sterility. To sever ourselves from the warp is to sever ourselves from life." His words were not meant for others. They were a confession, a slow unravelling of faith. One cycle, Aelith found him asleep at his desk. The codex lay open before him, the pages covered in delicate lines of gold ink script. She read a few sentences and felt a shiver run through her. "You cannot speak such things," she whispered. "If the others hear, they will think you've fallen." He stirred, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Fallen from what? There is nowhere left to fall." She touched his arm gently. "You have to let go of the past." Illyrian turned to her, eyes hollow. "The past is all we have left. The silence has erased everything else." That night, a tremor passed through the ship. It was faint, barely more than a vibration, but every soul aboard felt it. Lights flickered, and the hum of the Wraithbone deepened for the first time in centuries. The priests gathered in alarm, declaring it a test of their devotion. Illyrian felt something different, a stirring beneath the stillness, a heartbeat within the heart of the ship. He followed the pulse to the Chamber of Souls. The conduits there glowed, faintly, though they should have been inert. He laid his hand upon the surface, and the faintest whisper brushed his mind. "We are still here." He recoiled, staring in horror as the Wraithbone veins began to shift, flexing like muscle beneath skin. Aelith arrived moments later, her aura flickering with fear. "What is it?" she gasped. Illyrian shook his head. "The silence is breaking." The light around them brightened, filling the chamber with a soft, ghostly glow. Voices rose, hundreds, then thousands, blending into a low, mournful hum. They were not screams of pain, but of longing. The souls within the circuit had awakened, pressing against the barrier between life and death. Aelith clutched his arm. "If we do not stop it, the warp will hear." Illyrian stared into the light, mesmerized. Maybe it already does. The voices grew louder, and within their song, he recognized familiar tones, the cadence of those who had perished long ago, the laughter of those who once loved, the echo of a world that refused to die. Tears filled his eyes. "They are not gone," he whispered. "They were never gone." Aelith's voice broke. "Illyrian, if you open yourself to them, she will find you again." But it was too late. He felt the barrier within his mind crack, a single note of sound piercing the void like light through glass. The hum of the ship deepened into a chord so pure it made the stars themselves tremble. And through it came her voice, softer than he remembered, almost human. "You cannot silence what was born of song," she said. "I am not your enemy. I am the echo of your own longing." He sank to his knees, overwhelmed by the weight of memory. Around him, the light dimmed once more, retreating into the conduits. The chamber fell silent again, but the silence was different now, alive, resonant, trembling at the edges. Aelith knelt beside him, her eyes filled with tears. "What did she say?" He smiled faintly. "That we have mistaken silence for peace." Outside, the void rippled faintly as the craft world drifted onward. The stars, cold and ancient, watched in quiet indifference. Within the ship, the Aeldari dreamed again for the first time in generations, not of gods nor of despair, but of light that did not consume. Illyrian stood once more before the observation dome, the eye of terror far behind him, its glow faint and distant. He could still feel her presence there, waiting, eternal. But for now, she did not call. The silence had changed. It no longer felt like an ending. It felt like the pause before a song remembered. Time drifted differently within the silent corridors of Lathrien. Days no longer passed in sequence. They folded over one another like reflections in darkened glass. The Aeldari moved through their lives as ghosts of themselves, tending the gardens of crystal and shadow, speaking little, dreaming more. Yet something new began to bloom in that stillness, a trembling awareness, faint as the first breeze before a storm. The wraithbone sang again, so softly at first that most mistook it for the murmur of blood in their ears. But Illyrian heard it clearly. It was not the goddess this time. It was the living. It was the sound of the Aeldari remembering how to feel. He stood in the meditation hall when the first change occurred. A child, no older than a dozen cycles, sat among the acolytes, eyes closed in quiet focus. The air shimmered faintly around her. When she opened her eyes, they glowed with a light that was not warp-born but something gentler, something balanced. The priest gasped, afraid. Illyrian knelt before her. "What do you hear?" he asked. The child smiled faintly. "I hear the stars breathing." He touched her shoulder, feeling warmth where there had been only cold. "Then listen closely," he said, "but never forget the silence between each breath." Word spread quickly through the craft world. Some rejoiced, others panicked. The priest called emergency councils, fearing the return of temptation. Illyrian argued for calm, his voice weary but resolute. The silence was never meant to be eternal, he told them. It was a bridge, not a tomb. If we do not cross it, we will fade entirely. His words divided the council. Some accused him of heresy, of courting the same folly that destroyed them before. But a quiet majority, led by Aelith, supported him. She had seen the chamber's awakening, had heard the dead singing through the walls. "Perhaps," she said softly, "the goddess cannot be unmade, but maybe she can be forgiven." That night, Illyrian walked alone through the lower levels, where the wraithbone veins glowed faintly beneath his feet. He could feel the pulse of life again, faint, fragile, but real. For the first time in centuries, he allowed himself to hope. Yet with hope came fear. He knew that any stirring of emotion risked awakening the warp once more. But perhaps suppression was a slower death. The Aeldari had lived too long as echoes. To feel again, even at the risk of ruin, might be their only salvation. He entered the observation dome and stared at the void beyond. The eye of terror was distant now, but its light still touched him faintly, like an ember that refused to die. He spoke to it, not as to a god, but as to an old wound. "You were born of us," he murmured. "But so was she, the part that still remembers love. If you are the hunger of our souls, then perhaps she is their mercy." His reflection wavered against the glass, and for a moment he thought he saw another shape beside him, tall, graceful, familiar. Shale's outline shimmered faintly before fading again. No voice followed, only the faint hum of stars. Aelith found him there hours later. She stood beside him in silence, her gaze fixed on the same horizon. "The others grow restless," she said. "They dream too vividly now. Some see colours in the air. Some hear songs when they touch the walls." Illyrian's eyes did not leave the void. "Good," he said. "It means we still exist." She hesitated. "But if the goddess hears—" He turned to her, a faint smile beneath the exhaustion. "Then let her hear. We cannot hide forever. Perhaps she has changed, as we have." The next day, the child from the meditation hall vanished. Panic spread quickly, for children were few and precious. Search parties scoured the decks until one of them found her standing before the sealed gate of the Infinity Circuit. She was unafraid, her hand resting upon the glowing surface. When Illyrion arrived, he saw that the Wraithbone had begun to pulse with soft light again, brighter with every beat of her heart. "She's singing," Aelith whispered. "The souls inside are answering her." Illyrion stepped forward, hearing the melody, a slow, sorrowful hymn woven from voices old and new. It was not the seductive song of Slanesh. It was different, a lament that spoke of balance, of forgiveness. The priest cried out to stop it, to cut the power before the warp felt their presence. But Illyrion raised his hand. "No," he said quietly. "This is not the goddess's hunger. This is ours, tempered, remembered, reborn." He approached the child, kneeling beside her as the light spread across the chamber. "What do you see?" he asked again. She smiled. "She's not angry anymore. She's lonely." Illyrion's throat tightened. "Then tell her we remember her still." The song deepened, filling the craft world like a tide. Every soul aboard felt it, the touch of something vast and gentle brushing their thoughts. Some wept openly, others fell to their knees, and through the chorus, Illyrion heard her voice once more, softer than before, distant as the last echo of dawn. "You cannot undo what you are," she said, "but you can choose what it means." Then the light faded, leaving only the silence again, but it was no longer empty. It carried warmth, faint and trembling. Illyrion looked around at his people, at the faces lifted in awe. The silence, he realized, had become their prayer. The bridge had been crossed. He turned to the child, who now slept peacefully in Aelith's arms. "What happens now?" Aelith asked. Illyrion looked toward the stars, where the eye flickered faintly, no longer a wound, but a reminder. "Now," he said, "we learn how to live with our ghosts." The craft world drifted through a quiet sea of starlight, far from any sun, far from any song. Within its living walls, the pulse of the Wraithbone had steadied, no longer silent but measured. like the breath of something healing after a long illness. The Aeldari moved through its corridors with a new stillness, no longer the hollow calm of fear, but the cautious reverence of awakening. They had begun to feel again. They laughed softly, wept quietly, touched each other's hands as if rediscovering what warmth meant. For the first time since the fall, the silence was not a void, but a canvas upon which life could begin to paint again. Illyrian watched it all from the higher spires. Below him, light drifted through the wraithbone veins like veins of liquid gold, and children played in gardens of crystalline bloom. Yet his peace was uneasy. The song that had once filled the craft world was returning in faint echoes, gentle at first, then stronger, harmonies blooming where before there had been stillness. He listened with awe and dread. The Aeldari were remembering what it meant to be whole, but he knew that memory was a dangerous tide. The same music that could heal them might also call the goddess back. He met with Aelith in the Sanctum of Stars, where the ceiling opened to the void beyond. "They are changing," she said, her voice half wonder, half fear. "We feel again, and the ship feels with us. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see her shadow behind the light." Illyrian nodded slowly. She was born from our excess, but she was also born from our beauty. If we live without feeling, we betray what we were. If we feel without wisdom, we repeat what destroyed us. Aelith looked at him gravely. "And if we do nothing?" He smiled faintly. "Then we fade, and even silence forgets our names." Later, alone in his quarters, Illyrian reopened the Codex of Silence. The once empty pages shimmered faintly now, as if the words themselves breathed. He read his earlier lines, warnings, laments, confessions, and then began to write anew. "We have lived too long fearing our reflection," he wrote. "Perhaps the only way to master it is to meet it unafraid. The goddess was never only a curse. She was the mirror of our longing, the proof that we could dream too deeply. To banish her is to deny ourselves. To remember her is to forgive." He closed the codex and gazed through the viewport. Outside, a storm of faint colours shimmered against the distant stars, subtle ripples in the void like the afterglow of a forgotten dawn. He felt her there, faint and patient, no longer a predator but an echo, watching through the thin veil between realms. "We are not your children anymore," he whispered, "but neither are we your enemies." For a moment the air stirred, and he thought he heard her laugh, soft, weary, almost kind. Days passed, and the craft world glided into a region of broken light, where the remnants of dead suns hung like frozen embers. Here the wraithbone began to resonate again, attuned to distant vibrations. Illyrian stood among the seers as they traced the signals. "It is not the warp," one murmured. "It is something else, something calling." The readings were faint but distinct, echoes of another craft world, survivors. The council gathered, torn between hope and fear. Some wished to respond, others warned of traps. Illyrian said nothing for a long time, his gaze fixed on the trembling lights. At last, he spoke. "We cannot hide forever. If others live, we owe them our voice." They altered course. The journey was long, the void vast. As they approached the signal's source, a shape emerged from the darkness, a vast silhouette adrift, fractured and hollow. Another craft world, broken in half, its core exposed like a wound. The signals they had followed were faint residual transmissions, echoes of life long extinguished. Yet something stirred within the wreckage, faint and rhythmic. Against the council's pleas, Illyrian led a small vessel to investigate. The derelict ship was silent, its corridors filled with drifting dust that shimmered in the weak light. Statues of wraithbone figures lined the halls, frozen mid-motion, as though caught between prayer and scream. Aeldari walked among them, his breath shallow. The air was thick with psychic residue, grief, devotion, despair. Aelith followed close behind, whispering. They tried to seal themselves as we did. He nodded, and failed. They reached the heart of the ruined craft world, where the infinity circuit lay shattered. Its fragments pulsed faintly, still alive, still whispering. He touched one, and his vision filled with light. He saw faces, hundreds of them souls that had not been devoured but trapped in endless yearning. They sang a single word over and over, a word older than language, too vast for translation. He felt Shael's presence again, faint but clear. "Do you see now?" her voice murmured. "Even in death, they reach for beauty." Tears filled his eyes, and yet they are lost. "Not lost," she said, waiting. When the vision faded, Aeldari withdrew his hand. The fragment dimmed, its pulse slowing. Aelith placed her palm upon his. "What did you see?" He looked at her quietly. A warning and a promise. Together they left the ruined hall, the echoes following them like fading song. When they returned to Lathrien, Aeldari stood once more before his people. "We have lived through death," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber. "We cannot erase the past, but we can choose what it becomes. Let our silence not be fear, but reverence. Let our voices rise again, not in arrogance, but in memory." The crowd bowed their heads. Some wept. The child from before smiled, her eyes bright with quiet understanding. As the craft world drifted onward, its song grew steadier, soft, restrained, luminous. The void listened and did not answer, and that was enough. Aeldari turned once more toward the stars and whispered, "The bridge holds." The corridors of Lathrien had grown quieter still, though the silence was no longer empty. It resonated with the careful pulse of life rediscovered, subtle and deliberate. Aeldari moved among the Aeldari with the measured pace of one who had watched centuries pass, his eyes tracing their slow, deliberate motions. Children laughed softly as they learned to manipulate light and song without summoning the hunger that had once consumed them. Elders taught restraint through touch, an example rather than command. Yet beneath this fragile order, a tension lingered, like frost on still water waiting to crack. Aeldari spent his hours in observation, learning the rhythms of recovery. The wraithbone hummed with faint energy, its veins shimmering against the walls as if sensing their renewed vitality. He walked to the observation dome and gazed outward. The void was vast, black and indifferent, speckled with distant stars. Far behind, the eye of terror pulsed faintly, a reminder of what could have been lost and what might still awaken. The memory of Shael lingered there, distant yet vivid, as though she were a star half buried in shadow. Aeldari shivered despite the calm of the craft world. Aelith approached him silently, carrying the codex of silence. "They speak more now," she said, her voice soft but insistent. "The survivors, the children, even the archives, they all hum with memory. The dead are restless again." Aeldari took the codex and traced his fingers over the etched symbols. "Restless," he repeated, not in anger, but in hope. "We thought we could hide from the past, but the past cannot be hidden. It only waits." Aelith nodded, sensing the weight of his thought. "Do you think she watches?" he asked quietly. "Always," she said. "And perhaps now she waits for understanding rather than obedience." That night, Aeldari walked to the central meditation hall. The survivors had gathered there in hushed reverence, their attention drawn to a single child seated in the center. Her eyes glowed faintly, pulsing with the rhythm of the wraithbone itself. She hummed a tune, a lullaby older than memory, soft and tentative. As Illyrian watched, the corridors around the hall seemed to pulse in response, a gentle resonance like breath. The dead within the infinity circuit stirred faintly, not with hunger, but with recognition. The craft world itself was learning to breathe again. Suddenly, the dome above shifted, faint ripples of light dancing across the void outside. Illyrian felt a presence, not hostile, not demanding, but observant, patient. Shael's echo, perhaps, or the memory of her made permanent by the events of the fall. The child's song responded to it, weaving itself into a melody that filled the hall. The Aeldari present felt it in their bones, a quiet reminder that the goddess, or what remained of her, was neither absence nor annihilation, but reflection. Illyrian knelt beside the child. "What do you see?" he asked, careful not to disturb the fragile balance. The child looked at him and smiled faintly. "I see them," she whispered. "All of them. And they are calm." He traced a finger along the edge of her wraithbone resonance. "Even the dead?" She nodded. "Even them? They remember the song we lost." Aelith placed a hand on his shoulder. "Perhaps the bridge is no longer fragile," she said. "Perhaps it is holding because we have learned to step upon it lightly." The days that followed were measured, quiet, and deliberate. Illyrian guided the craft world's scholars and seers, helping them teach restraint, turning knowledge into ritual without rigidity. He instructed the children to manipulate light, color, and sound as if painting air, always mindful of the ripple that might awaken what they had feared. The survivors adapted, their movements slow but confident. Occasionally, a flicker of memory from the old days would rise unbidden, and Illyrian would trace its echo back to a child or scholar, guiding it into harmony rather than chaos. One evening, as the twin moons of Lathrian reflected faintly across the inner canals, Illyrian stood alone in the observation dome. The eye of terror pulsed distantly, pale and patient. He felt her presence again, distant but aware, and this time there was no fear in the sensation, only curiosity. Perhaps she had watched, perhaps she had waited, perhaps she had come to understand the lessons of silence and memory that the Aeldari had rediscovered. Illyrian's mind reached outward, across the void, toward the faint pulse of her existence. "We have learned," he whispered, "not to banish, but to remember." Eilith joined him silently. "Do you think she will return?" Illyrian shook his head slowly. "Not as she was. She will always be present, but she has learned what we have learned. That restraint, remembrance, and balance are more powerful than hunger." He traced a finger across the cold glass. "She is no longer a predator. She is a witness." Aelith nodded, letting the words settle. Outside, the stars moved in slow procession, indifferent yet patient. The craft world continued its slow drift through the void. Life returned in small measures, careful yet determined. Children learned to dream without summoning the storm. Elders taught memory as art rather than command. The wraithbone hummed with steady rhythm, a gentle heartbeat beneath the feet of the survivors. Illyrian watched, knowing that the balance would remain fragile forever, yet confident that the Aeldari had begun to understand the weight of eternity in a way they never had before. And somewhere beyond the distant stars, in the faint glow of the eye, she lingered, no longer angered, no longer consuming. She was present, patient, and watching, a silent observer of the fragile lives that had survived her birth. Illyrian turned to Aelith, and together they watched the void. The galaxy stretched endlessly before them, indifferent yet forgiving, and for the first time since the fall, Illyrian believed that the Aeldari might endure, not because they were perfect, but because they had remembered how to feel. Centuries passed like breaths drawn too deeply to count. Lathrian drifted through the dark between stars, its wraithbone body aglow with the faint pulse of memory. The silence had grown softer, warmer, filled now with the subtle rhythm of a people who had learned to live quietly within themselves. The Aeldari had not forgotten the goddess, nor the terrible beauty of their fall, but remembrance had ceased to wound them. It had become ritual, a meditation that reminded them of what balance cost. Illyrian Vile had grown older, though time no longer touched his form. His eyes carried galaxies within them, both sorrowful and calm. He spent his days in the gardens of crystalline bloom, where light filtered through domes of living glass. Here, he listened to the hum of the ship and the laughter of children who no longer feared sound. Aelith remained at his side, her once youthful face now marked by stillness rather than age. They rarely spoke of the past anymore. When they did, it was without grief, as one might discuss the change of seasons long gone. "Do you ever wonder," she asked one evening, "if the silence changed her too?" Illyrian looked toward the void beyond the transparent dome, where the eye of terror glimmered faintly like a wound healed over with scar tissue. "Yes," he said, "I think she learned the price of being eternal. Even hunger must one day rest." The wraithbone beneath them pulsed gently, carrying the murmur of countless souls woven into its living network. Each vibration was a memory of birth, of art, of restraint. The dead and living existed in quiet harmony now, each aware of the other, neither seeking to dominate nor to escape. It was a fragile peace, but it endured. The priests of Lathrian no longer preached silence as law. Instead, they spoke of equilibrium, of thought held between two heartbeats. The children were taught to shape light and sound as extensions of feeling, never excess, never void. Illyrian watched them and thought, this perhaps is redemption, not triumph, but understanding. One night, as he walked alone through the lower corridors, he felt a tremor pass through the floor. It was not danger, not warning, but something older, like recognition. The lights flickered, and the air grew faintly warm. He followed the sound to the Chamber of Souls, where the infinity circuit shimmered brighter than he had seen in centuries. Within its glowing depths, shadows moved, figures faint as memory, familiar as dreams. Among them, one form turned toward him, radiant and serene. Shail. She was as she had been before the fall, but softened, her edges no longer aflame. Her voice came not through sound, but through the resonance of thought. "You have done what we could not," she said. "You taught them to live with the weight of themselves." Illyrian bowed his head. "We merely endured." Her image smiled. "Endurance is the highest form of creation." He stepped closer, feeling the warmth of her presence, though she was nothing but light within the crystal. "Are you free?" he asked. She tilted her head, the faintest shimmer crossing her form. "Freedom is no longer what I seek. I am part of what remains. The hunger is quiet now. She sleeps, and through her dreams, I see all that you have rebuilt. You have made her a mirror of peace." Illyrian closed his eyes. "Then perhaps we have both found forgiveness." The vision flickered, her light dimming slowly. "You will not see me again," she whispered. "But remember, perfection was never our curse. It was forgetting." Then she was gone, her glow folding back into the circuitry until only the steady hum of the ship remained. Illyrian stood in the dimness, tears glistening on his cheeks. For the first time in countless ages, he felt something close to joy, not the wild ecstasy of old, but a quiet, steady warmth, the kind that endures when all fire has burned out. He returned to the upper decks where Aelith waited, sensing the change upon him. "You saw her," she said, not as a question. He nodded. "She is at rest." Aelith's gaze softened. "Then so are we." They stood together as the craft world glided past the dying embers of a collapsed star. Its fading light bathed them in hues of crimson and gold. "Do you think the galaxy will ever forgive us?" she asked. Illyrian's eyes followed the slow rotation of the heavens. "Perhaps it already has. The stars still burn. The void still listens. That is forgiveness enough." Later, he returned to the Codex of Silence one last time. Its pages glowed faintly beneath his hands. He wrote, "To those who will come after us, remember, we are not defined by the gods we create, but by how we learn to live after they fall. To be Aeldari is to carry eternity within a fragile soul. Guard it well, but never fear its echo." He closed the book, leaving it upon the altar of light, where it would remain long after he was gone. As centuries folded into silence once more, the craft world continued its endless voyage. The eye of terror remained behind them, a fading scar across the face of night. Within the living halls of Lathrien, the Aeldari thrived in the soft rhythm between sorrow and song. Illyrian's name became legend, then memory, then myth, whispered by those who believed he still walked among the stars. And somewhere, beyond the veil of light and shadow, a faint laughter echoed through the quiet, a sound not of hunger, but of peace remembered. The centuries that followed Illyrian's passing folded gently into the memory of the ship itself. His name became a whisper embedded within the wraithbone, a harmonic echo that lingered whenever the craft world exhaled through its resonant chambers. The Aeldari spoke of him not as a prophet or savior, but as the quiet voice that had taught them to listen between heartbeats. The Codex of Silence rested still upon its altar, its pages sealed by light, unread but never forgotten. Above, the void turned slowly, patient and endless, and Lathrien glided through it like a dream refusing to fade. Generations passed. The children of those who had once known the terror of the fall grew without fear. Their laughter filled the corridors where Illyrian had walked, soft and bright as dawn. But with new life came new questions. The young ones were curious about the world beyond, the worlds of stars and dust, where other species rose and fell in their own fleeting cycles. They spoke of venturing outward, of finding others like themselves. The elders cautioned restraint, but curiosity has its own rhythm, and soon the first of them began to test the boundaries of their peace. Aelith, now ancient and serene, felt the shift long before it showed. She sat within the great hall, her hands folded upon her knees, eyes closed as she listened to the faint tremors moving through the wraithbone. It was not danger she felt, but awakening, a restlessness that mirrored what had once destroyed them. Yet it was different now, tempered by memory. The silence had not erased their nature, only taught them to bear it. She smiled faintly, whispering into the still air. So it begins again. Outside, Lathrien drifted into a field of shattered starlight, the remnants of a once living system, now reduced to dust and ruin. Among the debris floated fragments of architecture not their own, the metallic bones of a younger race, long extinguished. The explorers brought pieces of it aboard, slivers of alloy and crystal, humming faintly with energy. The council convened, uncertain whether this was curiosity or hubris reborn. Aelith attended but spoke little. She watched the younger seers debate the meaning of what they had found. "It is harmless," one said, "a relic of the lesser races." Another warned, "Relics remember, even when we forget." That night, as the craft world drifted in quiet orbit above the ruins, Aelith walked alone through the lower decks. The air was heavy with the faint scent of ozone, the residue of the alien fragments stored in containment. She stopped before the largest piece, a twisted shard of unknown metal, humming faintly like the residue of a thought. She reached out and touched it. A wave of sensation rippled through her mind. Flashes of faces, battles, songs she did not know, the echo of another civilization's end. She pulled her hand back, trembling. The fragment was a tomb, carrying the memory of those who had also reached too far. She returned to the council chamber, her steps slow but steady. "We are not the only ones who dream too deeply," she said. "This galaxy is full of our reflections. Every race that rises must one day face the silence we have learned to survive." The younger Aeldari listened, uncertain. "Then should we fear them?" one asked. Aelith shook her head. "No. Fear is the song that binds the warp to us. We must not fear, only remember." Over time, the fragments were released into space, set adrift with quiet ceremony. The Aeldari watched as they vanished into the dark, carried by the gravity of forgotten suns. Yet something in the act changed them. They began to feel kinship, not only with the dead of their own kind, but with the ghosts of others. The galaxy was vast, and sorrow had left its fingerprints everywhere. The Aeldari learned to move through it with reverence, not conquest. Their silence became not isolation, but respect, a way of listening to the echoes of creation itself. One evening, Aelith stood before the altar where the Codex of Silence lay. Its pages glowed softly, though none had touched them since Illyrian's hand last closed it. She placed her palm upon the cover and whispered. He spoke of balance. "We have kept it, but now the galaxy stirs again, and we must walk it carefully." As if in answer, the light within the Codex brightened, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest, a quiet reassurance, neither divine nor imagined, but familiar. Illyrian's voice came faintly, no louder than a thought. "Then teach them to listen as we did." Aelith smiled. "I will." When she left the hall, she did not feel sorrow. The silence that followed her was alive, resonant, filled with memory. She walked to the observation dome and gazed upon the stars. The eye of terror was still there, its faint glow constant, eternal. Yet it seemed smaller now, its hunger dimmed by time and distance. The galaxy shimmered around it, vast and untamed, filled with both peril and possibility. Aelith raised her hand to the glass. "We have not escaped eternity," she whispered. "We have learned to breathe within it." As she stood there, the hum of the craft world deepened, a single low note that reverberated through every corridor. It was not warning nor omen. It was song. The Aeldari below paused in their tasks, listening in silence as their homes sang softly to the stars. The tune was ancient and new at once, a remembrance of what they had been, and a promise of what they might still become. And in that moment, as the echoes faded into the quiet, the void itself seemed to listen back. Lathrian drifted beyond the rim of known stars, where the light of the galaxy faded into a silver haze. The void here was different, thicker, older, filled with the quiet gravity of forgotten time. It was said that no sound could travel there, not even the whispers of the warp. Yet the craft world moved as if guided by something unseen, drawn toward a stillness deeper than silence. Within its halls, generations had come and gone, and the name of Illyrian was now spoken only in the softest tones, like a prayer one dared not disturb. His teachings had become the foundation of their way of being, the law of quiet balance, the creed of listening. But peace, even eternal, has a rhythm, and every rhythm eventually shifts. Aelith was gone now, her spirit interred within the infinity circuit, her essence diffused among the dreaming souls that wove through the wraithbone like light through water. Those who came after her carried fragments of her memory, the way she had smiled when the stars sang, the calm certainty of her voice. Among them was Liren, a young seer born in an age that had never known the warp's corruption. His soul was bright, untethered, curious beyond restraint. To him, the silence felt less like safety and more like a veil. He would stand before the observation dome for hours, watching the silver mist shift beyond the glass, feeling something stir beyond comprehension. One night, the mist moved, not in a storm or wave, but in a slow, deliberate unfolding, like the turning of a vast and ancient hand. The wraithbone beneath Liren's feet vibrated faintly, and the infinity circuit thrummed in answer. He pressed his palm to the glass and whispered, "What are you?" A voice answered, not in words, but in the deep resonance of thought, a low harmonic that filled the chamber. It was not the goddess. It was older, gentler, like the echo of creation itself. He staggered back, breath shallow. The voice did not intrude upon his mind. It touched him, then withdrew, leaving a trail of understanding that shimmered like light fading into water. He went to the council, his expression bright with awe. "There is something beyond," he said. "Not of the warp, not of our kind. It calls to us without hunger." The elders exchanged uneasy glances. "We have heard such callings before," one said. "They always end in ruin." Liren shook his head. "This is not ruin. It is remembrance. It feels like what we were before we fell." The council forbade further exploration, but he could not let it rest. That night, guided by instinct or destiny, he returned to the dome and opened his mind to the silence. The mist responded, parting to reveal faint structures, monolithic silhouettes adrift in the void, like the skeletons of long-dead worlds. He reached out with his thoughts, and for an instant, the veil between realms thinned. The infinity circuit flared to life, its light spilling through the corridors of Lathrian. Every Aeldari aboard felt it, the pulse of recognition, a soft vibration in the soul that spoke of a home long lost. The wraithbone began to hum, not in alarm, but in harmony. The elders awoke from their meditations to find the entire craft world alive with quiet song. Liren stood at its center, eyes glowing, his body outlined in faint silver light. "They remember us," he whispered. "Or perhaps we are remembering them." The glow faded, leaving the ship still and breathless. When the elders reached him, he was unconscious but unharmed. For days he slept, dreaming in silence. When he awoke, he spoke of visions, vast structures where the first Aeldari might once have walked, before the stars themselves were born. He said the silence was not absence, but the resting place of creation, the point where all thought returned when it had learned all it could bear. The council listened in fearful wonder. Some believed him. Others feared that he had awakened something that even the goddess had not dared approach. Weeks passed. Liren recovered, though he remained distant, as if part of him still listened to something beyond the edge of being. The craft world continued its voyage, yet subtle changes spread through its living body. The wraithbone grew brighter, softer, more fluid in its song. The souls within the infinity circuit whispered of peace deeper than any they had known. The children dreamed of stars being born, not destroyed. And in the silence between their dreams, something vast and ancient breathed with them. Neither God nor spirit, but perhaps the universe itself, watching through the glass of eternity. On the final night of the season of stillness, Lyrin walked alone to the observation dome. The mist beyond had parted completely now, revealing a sea of pale light that stretched forever. He understood then that it was not a place, but a state, a reflection of what the Aeldari had become. He closed his eyes and whispered into the void, "We have learned to live with our ghosts. If you are listening, know that we forgive ourselves." The light pulsed once, faint and kind, and then stilled. Far below, the infinity circuit shimmered like dawn beneath water. The craft world glided onward, eternal and unafraid, carrying within it the final truth of its long, sorrowed journey, that silence was never emptiness, and that even in the endless dark, creation still remembered its first song. The silence of the stars deepened, and Lathrian drifted onward through the silver reaches of the void, its wraithbone heart pulsing with the rhythm of eternity. Ages had passed since Illyrian's hand first shaped the creed of balance, and still the craft world endured. An arc of light carried through the endless dark. The Aeldari had changed. They spoke less of gods and more of memory, less of fear and more of patience. Within their halls, song had returned, not the reckless harmonies of old, but quiet psalms sung to the cadence of breathing, a music woven of restraint and reverence. The silence had become not a boundary but a home, and the echo of their past no longer haunted them, it guided them. Leren, the last seer born beneath Aelith's teaching, had grown into a figure of myth among his people. Some said he still walked the corridors unseen, others that he had transcended flesh, his spirit fused with the wraithbone to speak for the ship itself. None could say for certain, yet his presence lingered in the quiet. The craft world would hum differently when his name was spoken, as if the air itself remembered him. He had taught them that the void was alive, that to listen was to be eternal. And so they listened, to the pulse of the ship, to the breath of one another, to the distant heartbeat of creation itself. But even peace carries within it the echo of movement. One morning, if morning could still be called such where no sun shone, the outer sensors detected a soundless ripple, a disturbance faint and long delayed, like a thought arriving from centuries past. The elders convened in the crystalline chamber, their faces calm yet alert. "It is not warp-born," said the archivist. "It does not carry corruption. It is something else." The youngest among them, a child whose eyes still glowed with untempered curiosity, whispered, "Maybe the universe is calling back." The council fell silent, each feeling a quiet recognition in the words. For a long time, they had only listened. Perhaps now it was time to answer. They followed the signal into the borderless depths, and there, suspended in the silver haze, they found a relic older than memory. A vast construct of blackened metal and crystal, larger than any craft world, its surface inscribed with runes that no living tongue could name. It was neither Aeldari nor human, neither chaos nor order. It existed beyond definition, a shape older than grief. Lorraine's teachings echoed through their minds as they approached. Do not name what you do not yet understand. To name is to limit, and so they entered wordlessly. Inside, there was no gravity, no sound, no time. The walls glimmered faintly with light that pulsed in rhythm with their heartbeats, though none of them knew whose heartbeat led. The silence was complete, perfect, encompassing, divine. It was not emptiness, but presence, as if the very act of existing there was communion. One of the explorers reached out and touched the wall. At once, images bloomed in their minds: the birth of stars, the collapse of suns, the rise and fall of empires long turned to dust. The universe unveiled itself not as chaos, but as memory, each age folding gently into the next, leaving echoes instead of ashes. Among those visions, they saw themselves, the Aeldari, bright and brief, luminous and flawed, forever seeking meaning in the endless dark. They saw the fall, the goddess's birth, the silence that followed, and the long path of redemption that had led them here. But the vision did not end in despair. It showed them as they were now, still wandering, still learning. Their silence no longer a wound, but a bridge. The construct itself seemed to hum with approval, a low tone that vibrated through their bones. It was as though the universe itself acknowledged them, not as masters, not as survivors, but as participants in its eternal rhythm. When they returned to Lathrien, they did not speak of what they had seen. There were no words for it, only understanding. The elders ordered that no one approach the construct again. It was not a place to conquer or study, but to remember. The craft world altered its course, gliding once more into the infinite dark, leaving behind the relic as a monument to what they had become, a reminder that silence was not an absence of sound, but the presence of everything unspoken. Years turned to centuries, and Lathrien itself became myth. The galaxy changed again. Wars raged, stars died, new species rose, and even gods fell silent. Yet somewhere beyond the reach of those stories, in a pocket of light untouched by time, the craft world still drifted. Inside, the children learned from their elders the final truth of their people, that to exist was to remember, and that memory, when held in balance, could become peace. They sang softly in the dim corridors, songs without words, and their voices merged with the hum of the ship, rising and fading like the tides of breath. In the infinity circuit, where souls shimmered like motes of light, Illyrian and Aelith and Lyrin watched in eternal quiet. They no longer spoke, for language was too small a vessel, but the harmony between them was perfect, a circle unbroken. Through them, the Aeldari endured, not as rulers of stars, not as slaves to gods, but as witnesses of creation's vast and endless unfolding. And beyond them, in the farthest reaches of the void, the universe listened back. A single note, neither joy nor sorrow, resonated across the fabric of time, the first and final chord of existence. It was the song that began all things, the silence that would end them, and the voice that lay between.